So we're in chapter 8, is it? Yeah, we're in chapter 8, talking about how intelligent we are. And for the people online, I'll upload this when I get home. It's Gardner's list of intelligence. 8 kinds of intelligence. And I thought when we start talking about this we're on page 295, where it talks about theories of intelligence, that it might be helpful to have kind of a reference point, and then from that, look at these other theories and see, in a sense, what would you say? Gardner came after all these people, so see how he maybe borrowed from them, and how much their theories relate to Gardner's list here. But when you look over this list, and Gardner's list in the textbook is mentioned on page 297, but it just lists them out by name. And what's neat about this handout that I'm going to upload when I get home today is that it not only lists the 8 kinds of intelligence, but then it gives examples, and then it has a discussion. So it kind of helps flesh out what these labels mean and what they're all about. And we were just talking here in class before class started about which kind you have the most of, which kind you have the least of. And somebody was bold enough to mention that their least was logical, mathematical. And why would that be bold to say that in my class?
Because you're a math teacher?
Because I'm a math teacher. And if we're not careful, we say, well, I don't know, I don't want to get on his bad side. It's like, what? So everyone who likes math are my friends, and people who don't are not my friends? What's that all about? Doesn't that sometimes happen, though? Doesn't that sometimes happen to us, that we tend to gravitate toward people who are like us? Got you today. And then stay away from people who aren't like us. And since of the 8 things on here, my strongest is logical, mathematical. And I've known that since I was a little kid, because I was just naturally good at math. And when I did well, when I aced all my math exams and did all my homework, what did the teacher say to me? Tommy, you are so smart. So I knew I was intelligent because they told me I was. And I tell people, I heard teachers tell me I was smart so often that I became a smart aleck. What is that? A little mouthy in class, talking back, being sassy, both at home and in class and other places. I didn't get saved till I was 18, so I had a few years of messing up big time before I started getting life together. But mathematics, I knew it right away. And then, as I shared before class started, since I enjoy music so much, I thought maybe I have some musical intelligence. It's just never been tapped. So I took music lessons for a year, and my music teacher said, save your money, give it up. Let other people do the music and you just enjoy it. But what did that do for me? By trying to learn to play a piano for a year and not being able to do anything with it, then to hear somebody sit down and play the piano, I have a new appreciation for their level of intelligence. You follow me? That's where it didn't damage me to find out I don't have that. You're not damaged, are you? Those of you who mentioned that mathematical is your lowest one on this list of 8, you're not damaged by that, are you? I mean, I hope not. The woman I'm married to, that would be her lowest on this list too. Well, maybe her lowest would be logical, mathematical, and spatial. And I put spatial / visual based on what who was it? One of the other theorists mentioned. So I added visual to spatial on my little sheet here, writing stuff down and adding to it, because this is yours to keep. So I'm hoping you write some notes on it to help you. But maybe put a little X by the one that you're really good at, or a little plus by the ones that maybe, for me, I'd put mathematical, I'd put like 3 pluses. And then I'd look over the list and say, what else could I check off as a plus? And I didn't know it at the time, but when I came to school here and I needed to pay my school bill and I was working lots of hours, somebody suggested that I better look for a job that I could get more sleep and take care of my health. And so I said, Lord, I don't have time to look for a job, so if you bring one along, I'm willing to take it. And within a week, a guy asked me if I wanted to sell insurance. And I said, no. And he said, why not? I said, my dad says insurance salesmen are thieves and liars, and you can't trust them. And I couldn't steal from people or lie to them. He said, good, that's the kind of people we're looking for. And then he said, would you come in and take a test? And I might be able to hire you to, and here's what he said, earn more money than you earn now working fewer hours. That's just exactly what someone suggested I do. I thought, well, I'll go in and take his test. All I can do is fail it. And I took his test and I passed it. And he goes, wow, this is going to work. I'm ready to hire you today. Now, which list, look at the examples, which list was I in? Which kind of intelligence did I have after he gave me that test on selling insurance?
Interpersonal?
Interpersonal. I didn't even know I had that. Because being a smart aleck when I was growing up and being mathematical kind of didn't do a lot to make interpersonal things, didn't have a lot of magic going on there. So I never knew that. And this guy gave me a test that was measuring your interpersonal skills, and he said, this is going to work. So I said, well, then sign me up. And I went to work and did very well at it and made a good living. And then one of my professors at school in a lecture one day said, you know, some of you guys who could have a lifetime of ministry serving others are going to get caught up in the business world and start making so much money that when you graduate and it comes time to go into ministry, you won't be able to afford to do it. And you'll be stuck in some kind of high-paying job for the rest of your life. And I thought, that is not going to happen to me, Lord. But by the time I graduated, I was making a substantial salary. And sure enough, when it came time to go to work in a Christian school, the salary at the Christian school was 1/3 of what I made selling insurance. And guess what some Christian friends suggested to me? They actually said, well, wouldn't God want you to take the job that pays the most? Where does that come from? Does that come from the Bible? No, that comes from the culture we live in that says what? You always sell your skills to the highest bidder, to the person who'll pay the most for the skills you have. And so basically, God worked in my heart and life in such a way that he moved me away from a high-paying job to, my joke is that I took a vow of poverty and became a Christian school teacher. And have been doing it for the rest of my life, and so glad I did, and enjoyed it immensely. And I just thought that was fun. I had that opportunity to sell insurance and pay my way through school, but I don't need to do that the rest of my life. So, along with my mathematical, I'd give myself probably 3 pluses there. I would give myself at least 1 and maybe 2 pluses, probably 1 in interpersonal skills, because I discovered that from being a salesman. Now maybe some of you haven't discovered yours yet because you haven't been out there in life long enough to see what happens, what surfaces. But do any of you know, okay, some of you said you would give pluses to what, linguistics, I heard you say, and to musical, some of you said. Anybody else have something you'd give a plus to in your life?
Intrapersonal.
What?
Intrapersonal.
Intrapersonal. What's intrapersonal? In fact, when I started studying psychology and I learned about this intrapersonal stuff, I go, whoa, I have a plus in interpersonal, and then I also have a plus in intrapersonal. I mean, okay, do you ever find that the person you enjoy most talking to is yourself? Because other people don't understand what you meant by the words you used, and you understood perfectly. So I can have a conversation with myself about a lot of things, and then once in a while I'll share that conversation with my wife, and I'm going, well, you know, maybe I get 2 pluses for intrapersonal and only 1 for interpersonal, because it's like she just doesn't get it. She doesn't understand what I'm talking about. And I'm thinking, you know, it could be that, and then when I took psychology classes, it could be that not everybody would put a plus by this ability to think about your own thoughts and think about why you had that thought and think about where that thought came from and think about what's going on inside. I mean, in my human growth and development class that I'll teach after this one's over, I actually do an exercise where I say, put your hands over your ears. Do it. Just do it for me, just for fun. Put your hands over your ears and listen to your heartbeat. Is that cool? Is that cool? Now, see, I have people in human growth and development go, I do not want to do that. That's disgusting. I mean, isn't it cool to just listen to your own heartbeat? Now, see, if you say yes, then you probably get a plus in intrapersonal. Because tuning in to what's going on, insight into yourself, and being self-aware, knowing your own body and your own mind and why that works. Okay, so we've got someone in the room who gets a plus for linguistics, someone who gets a plus for musical, someone who gets a plus for intrapersonal, someone who gets a plus for mathematical, that's me, someone who gets a plus for interpersonal. Anybody else?
Like an aesthetic.
And that's a plus for what? A dancer, an athlete, a surgeon, or a craftsman? Which one are you? All of them?
Dancer.
A dancer? Okay, so bodily kinesthetic. You just have this coordination, this way. I'm not as interested in dancers, no offense, but athletes just intrigue me. And some athlete who's really good at what he does, they often ask him what he's doing, and he doesn't really know. It just kind of comes natural. He just does it. So we've got someone who's bodily kinesthetic. Do we have anybody who's checking something else off here? I'm just looking to see if we have all 8 kinds of intelligence represented here in class. We've got bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, linguistic, logical, mathematical, musical. Anyone naturalistic? Ah, there we've got one back there and another one up here. So we've got 2 naturalistic. So you really love doing bug collections? That's disgusting. Catching those little bugs and putting them in the freezer and killing them and sticking a pin through them and putting them in a box with some Latin name as a label. That's disgusting. No, that's so cool. And getting out in nature. And did anyone check spatial or visual? Any artist? Ah. One time I was watching a guy paint a picture, and I said, what do you see when you look at that canvas? And he said, I see this picture with no colors, that I need to pull colors off the palette and put them up there. And I said, aha, that explains why I'm not an artist. He said, why? I said, I look at that canvas and I look out there at what you're looking at, and then looking back at the canvas to paint it, and I see that tree out there. I look at the canvas, I see nothing but canvas. If I painted what I saw, I would just paint the whole thing one color. And he laughed. He goes, what? Because he saw something I didn't see. So I get a big minus for that painter stuff. But this is interesting. Now, see, this is what's interesting about this, talking about intelligence. I get a minus for being a sculptor or a painter or a surgeon. I've watched people do surgery on movies, and I just about faint watching it. No, can't handle that. But when it comes to navigating and getting around and having a sense of where I am, so apparently I have some of that, but not all of it. You follow me? There can be, I have kind of a very limited spatial intelligence, or specialized spatial intelligence, because there's a lot of those things that don't apply to me. But logical, mathematical, I just naturally do both of those. And when I was in grad school, they asked me if I wanted to take a course on logic, or whether I wanted to write a master's thesis. I'm going, that's a no-brainer. Sign me up for the logic class. He said, well, Tom, if you're going to work on a PhD someday, you might want to write a master's thesis. And I said, work on a PhD? I don't think so. Sign me up for logic and I'll be out of here and finish with my education. I actually finished my education, 3 times. When I got my bachelor's degree, I said, that's it. I'm through with school. When I got my master's degree, I said, that's it. I'm through with school. When I got my PhD, I said, that's it. I'm through with school. Are you ready for this? After I got my PhD, I went back and started working on another master's degree just for the fun of it. There's something weird about that, isn't there? I mean, just talking about it sounds weird to me. And I had friends who were agonizing over their schoolwork for their PhDs when I said, I'm having a fun. This is neat learning all this stuff. I'm having a good time. So, I don't know, maybe there ought to be another kind of intelligence here that would, I mean, if I taken what I just described and that doesn't fit in any of these, maybe I would add one down here and call it, what would you call it? Would you call it learning intelligence? That you just have a desire to learn things and a knack for learning things? Or would it be school? What would you call it? My interest in going to school and taking more classes just for the fun of it. Would you call that learning intelligence, or would you call that schooling intelligence? You don't care. So call it learning. And the reason I'll put learning first is because I happen to really enjoy learning new stuff just for the fun of it. But I'll also put schooling. And the reason for that is because I've taken so many college classes, I kind of know the routine. You sign up for a class, you find out what's required, you do the requirements, you take the test, you get your grade, you move on to the next one. It's just kind of the same old thing over and over and over again. But eventually, this is what's fun about graduate school. Once you get your bachelor's degree out of the way, then in your master's degree, you get to, well, how many hours do you have to complete? How many college credits do you have to earn to get a bachelor's degree? Like 128 or 130 or something? You know how many hours you have to complete to get a master's degree? 36. And then to get a PhD, you just do another 60 on top of that? Whoa! And then to get another master's degree, just do another 30 on top of that. That doesn't appeal to anybody? Does that appeal to anybody in here? So you're not going to add that ninth one, are you? That I just put down here. Okay, let's try adding a different one. If you don't like that one, let's add another one. I'll call that one number 9. Let's add another one to the list and call it 10. Now, I know it's early in the morning, but think about this. What kind of, think about an intelligent person you know who's really talented at something, but they wouldn't fit in one of these categories. I'm thinking of a friend of mine who's an auto mechanic. Anyone know an auto mechanic that you can pull in his shop and say, my car's making a funny noise? And he'll go, yep, I know what that is. That's a lifter sticking. And he says, leave it with me. It wouldn't be good to drive it. It could break something. Leave it with me and I'll have it fixed in a couple of days. Anyone know someone like that? You had no idea that's what was going on, right? When you heard that tap, 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 tap noise? And he says, that's a lifter sticking. And he takes it apart, fixes it. You go to another mechanic, he goes, well, I don't know what's wrong with it, but we'll take the lid off of it and look inside and see if we can find something. I'm thinking you better pull out of there and go to another mechanic. Because have you been to a mechanic where he doesn't really know what he's doing, so he fixes one thing and it didn't fix it, so he fixes another. He keeps putting on parts till he finds one that works. That costs you a lot of money. I'm thinking that I ought to get a refund for all the stuff that didn't work till you actually found the thing that worked. So I've added a 10th one here that I would call, what would you call that? Mechanical? Mechanical intelligence. Okay? Anyone here have some mechanical intelligence? And my friend who has a lot of mechanical intelligence didn't do very well in school. But it didn't matter. He wasn't going to college anyway. When he got out of school, he started fixing machines. And he's I'm going to say, a genius at fixing machines. And this guy I'm talking about is my brother, my little brother. And he had 2 older brothers who made straight A's in school. And he couldn't make an A if his life depended on it. And sad to say, my brother and I gave him a nickname. Any idea what that nickname was? How sad. When I got saved at 18, I felt so bad about that. I've spent the rest of my life apologizing to my little brother for calling him dummy. And I don't know why my parents didn't stop it. Maybe they didn't hear us doing it. But I've apologized to him several times. And he said to me one time, he said, it's okay, Tom. He said, I realized I wasn't dumb when I got to Germany in the military. I said, what happened? And he said, the commanding officer at the army base in Germany where I was stationed saw me in the motor pool fixing things. And he said, you're the smartest mechanic I've ever met in my life. And he put me in charge of the motor pool. So when he was in the army, after he got out of high school and went through basic training, and of course in basic training, what did they discover? He had a lot of mechanical ability, so they put him to work in the what do they call that? Where they fix machines. And then after he got out of the military, he got a job working for an oil company where they would send him off to Siberia to maintain an oil rig because he could make sure the generator kept going to keep everybody alive out there in the middle of sub-zero weather. And they would fly him off to obscure places where life depended on someone keeping the machinery going, because he could just listen to a machine and say, that doesn't sound right. We better order some parts and put that on before it breaks. And so I said, well, I don't see mechanical on here, so I'm going to add that one as a 10th category. Actually, that was my 9th category when I first thought about it. And then after that, I thought, not everybody has this love for learning, this love for going to school and taking classes. And I thought, okay, then that would be another kind of intelligence. Now, do you have something that you really have a passion for, a love for, that isn't listed here? That we could add and call it 11 or 12 or 13?
Cooking.
What?
Cooking.
Cooking? That's not listed here, is it? Do you know anybody who could just take the bare essentials and make a delicious meal out of it? Then let's add number 11. Let's put another one down here and let's call it cooking. Isn't this fun? You say, we can't do that. We can't take Gardner's list and add to it. Why not? He took everybody else's list and added to it, just looking around at life in general and seeing what he saw. Why can't we do that? Some people are just natural cooks. And when you're really good at it, you're not a cook, you're a chef, right? And then if you're really good at it, you're a master chef. And who would go to school just to learn how to cook food? Someone with that kind of intelligence. Now, can anyone think of another one we ought to put on here? Let's make it an even dozen. I can think of one. Are farmers listed anywhere along here? Or could we, no, I think I'll just call it farming, right? Or farming / ranching. We could call it agriculture, but it's more than that, isn't it? It's farming / ranching. I suppose you could also put gardening down there too, couldn't you? Some people plant stuff and it just grows like crazy. They just have a knack for when to plant it and how to take care of it, how much water to give it. And others, you plant something and it either dies because you forgot to water it, or it dies because you gave it too much water. And do you know people who just love farming or ranching and are really good at it? So now, have you thought of anybody else around here? Anybody else on here? Now that we're talking about different kind of trades, let's put a 13 down here. Let's add another one. Look to see if it's on the list. Are carpenters on the list?
No.
They could be bodily kinesthetic.
You could put them up there, but you know, some of the carpenters I know, they're not very coordinated. I mean, you know, they don't have a lot of that dancing and athletic moves. Like, I'm thinking of one I know who kind of stumbles around a lot, but he can just, I mean, he sees in his head what needs to be done to put a house together, to make the joints work and all that kind of thing. So I'm probably going to add a 13th one called carpentry. Now, this didn't happen in here because you're in college, so we've kind of found something for all of you in here. But what if I was using this in a high school classroom? And I said, these are the 8 kinds of intelligence. Which ones do you have? Now, if we only had 8, would there be some people in the room who'd say, I don't have any of those? But if you stretch the list out, if some of you are going to be teachers if you add to the list mechanical, cooking, farming and ranching, and carpentry, have you made allowance for all the people in the room? And can you see, once you add that to the list, can you think of anybody you know who maybe doesn't have any of these others as far as you know, but they have something that we could add to the list? I mean, we're at 13. Let's at least get off of 13. Let's go for 14. Can you think of anything to add? That's it? We're all done? So now we have, yes.
Well, I think the spatial visual one, like, it's half of it is more just like being oriented with your like location and stuff. And like I would say I am like artistically minded, but I'm really bad with direction in general. So like some kind of like, I don't know, just design one, like some like kind of expanding on the spatial one.
Okay, so someone who does what kind of design?
Like graphic design.
Graphic design? Okay, yeah, there you go. Number 14. And I'm going to put design. And then I'm going to put a little hyphen, and I'm going to put graphic. And then I'm going to put a comma, and I'm going to put another kind of design. Does anyone know a web designer? Okay. Do any of you know a web designer who's really good at what they do, but there's no place to go to school to study what they do? Because they're just have a knack for building websites. And you can tell when they've built a website how cool it is. They just have something that would be a design intelligence. So graphic and website. Oh, that might even be an architect. Could we add architect to that? Good. Okay, we're up to 14 now. Anybody want to add 15?
Technology.
What?
Technology.
Technology?
Technologically advanced.
Technology. 15. Would it be fair to say Bill Gates had a lot of technology intelligence?
That's fair.
So much so that even though his dad had paid for him to go to a high-powered school, he said, Dad, he said, school is wasting my time. I need to quit school so I can spend all of my time developing this thing called Microsoft, an operation system that is so good and so powerful that every computer designer started using it. You go, what? Did you know there were some operating systems before Microsoft? The first computers that came out, the first what they called personal computers. The first computer was like a room this size full of machinery. And someone figured out a way to build a small one that you could carry around. I bought one. They looked like, anyone ever see a portable sewing machine? That's what it looked like. And you took the cover off and it had a tiny little screen on it and two little slots where you put disk in it. And one disk was the operating system and the other disk was the data disk that you stored stuff on. And every manufacturing company, there were about 3 of them then, every manufacturing company had its own operating system. Bill Gates says, I can build something better than all of these 3 put together. He dropped out of college, developed his system, and as people started to build, once these personal computers caught on, everybody said, even the people who had their own operating system said Microsoft is so much better than what we have. Let's build our new machines to use Microsoft as the operating system. So that's an excellent suggestion. Technology. And Bill Gates would be an example of that. And I'm sure some of his parents' friends said, so what is Bill doing? He quit going to college so he can do what? And they would have said, oh, the poor boy. There's no future in that. Computers are going to be in buildings in large rooms. There won't be that many of them. There won't be a market for what he's making. And now, what do all of us use? Little computers. And what's the operating system for them? Microsoft. MS-DOS. Microsoft. The Microsoft disk operating system. And prior to that, there were other disk operating systems that people used that were proprietary with each computer you bought. Okay, anybody want to add another one? Have we covered the whole waterfront here? Don't you feel powerful? Maybe we should print up a new sheet and put it on a blog out there on the internet and put all of our names on it and say, we put this together in psychology class. We have just expanded Gardner's list from 8 to 15. Oh, we need one more. Because wouldn't it sound cool to go from 8 to 16? Oh, you go. Let's get on with this chapter and quit talking about intelligence. But do you understand where I'm going with this? Is that did God give everybody some kind of intelligence? When he created them and put them on this earth, he gave all of us some kind of intelligence. Have we discovered it? Have we tapped into it? And can you see schooling as you've experienced it hasn't necessarily tapped into all that, has it? Now, they've changed schooling because back when I was in school, we did have woodworking shop and we had Future Farmers of America where we learned hands-on stuff about how to do things, but that was because most of us, when we graduated, were going to become farmers, so we need to learn how to do all this stuff on a farm. But now, did any of you go to a school where they had a class, a carpentry class, where the people in class actually built a house, and then they'd get a vacant lot in town, build a house, the class would build the house, and then they would sell it and use the money to buy more lumber to build more houses next year? So some schools have started to enlarge, so to speak, the vision of what they do in schooling to involve all of these other kinds of intelligence that aren't necessarily identified in everyday life. Now, when you look at the theories on page 295 and 296, most of these theories, the content of the theory, what makes the heart of the theory is reflected in Gardner's list. But when you look at Thurston's list and Cattell's list, they have reasoning as one of the as one of the categories. Where would you put reasoning in Gardner's list? Which category would you put reasoning in?
Interpersonal. Well, if it's reasoning with people, I suppose.
Okay.
If it's reasoning other things, it would probably fit under logical mathematical.
So could we put reasoning under both of those? Like interpersonal, a person who does interpersonal reasoning would be good at debate. A person who does logical, mathematical reasoning would be good at solving problems. So maybe we'll put reasoning under both interpersonal and logical, mathematical. Then another one mentioned by Cattell is rote memory. Where would you put rote memory? Do any of you know someone who just, you give them a list of stuff to memorize, they just memorize it? They've got it, it's theirs. They can come in and put it on a test and done with it. Where would we put that rote memory ability?
I would put that in logical.
Under logical?
Yeah.
So we'll put rote memory there. Now see, and I'm okay with doing that, but I'm very mathematical, but my rote memory stuff is really poor. I don't know why. But remember we talked about down here under spatial that you could have one kind of that, have a lot of one kind of it, and a little bit of the other kind of it. I know a guy who would be like a surgeon who's very good at what he does, but he couldn't find his way around the block. You know what I mean? That he's got this ability, but the other part of it he's missing completely. And Thurston mentioned something about perceptual speed. It's like they're just quick about things. Did you know anybody in school, the teacher asked a question and they were just quick about answering it? They could answer the question before you had time to think about the question. Where would you put people that have that speed of perception? Some guy's coming down the court in a basketball game and he sees the opposition is lined up in a zone defense, and he sees out of the corner of his eye one of his teammates making a break for the basket, and he smiles because he already sees what's going to happen. He's going to throw the ball up like he's shooting, but he's not. He's throwing it up for the guy who's coming around to dunk it. You've seen that happen? When it happens, everybody goes, whoa! There's a guy who's got perceptual speed. Where would we put perceptual speed?
Bodily kinesthetic.
Bodily kinesthetic? Because that really shows up, doesn't it? And someone, that would be with dance, with athletics, with that kind of thing. So what about Sternberg's theory? 3 kinds of intelligence: analytical, creative, and practical are his 3 kinds of intelligence. Does Gardner have his analytical stuff here? Learn how to do things, acquire new knowledge, solve problems, carry out tasks effectively. Does all that show up in one of these categories, or should it be added? Should we add a 15th and call it analytical? Some people have analytical intelligence. That might be the mechanic. You know what? Maybe where we put mechanical intelligence, we could put analytical intelligence. No. Because when I think of mechanical intelligence, okay, I'm thinking of my brother again. He can take an engine apart and throw all the parts in a bucket of solvent to clean it, and then pull the parts out and put them all back together. If I try to fix something that's broken, when I take it apart, I line all the parts up on a paper towel. You know what I mean? I clean them and line them up, so I line them up the way I took them off. So why? So I can remember to put it back together the same way I took it apart, just reverse the process. And if one of my grandchildren comes running by when I've got this stuff all lined up and they kick it and mix it up, throw it away and go buy another one, because you're not going to figure out how to get it back together. But somehow, my little brother, it doesn't matter. Those parts can be anywhere. He can figure out how to put it all back together. He just pulls those parts out of there and then says, no, put this aside, put this aside. This goes first, this goes second. He can just figure it out. So should we add another category, 15 or 16, called analytical? I'm asking you, what do you think? Or does it fit somewhere up here? You're not going to tell me. Well, I don't want Sternberg to be left out of this process. Okay, since you're not saying anything, I'll go ahead and add analytical. Then what else? Then he talks about creative. Is creativity included in Gardner's list here?
And spatial and visual ish. And musical.
And under logical mathematical, some guy who's a brilliant mathematician comes up with some new idea that no one ever thought of before in math. So he's a creative mathematician. And what he thought of was so profound that we put his name on it. Do you know any famous mathematicians who came up with something? How many of you know the Pythagorean theorem? Okay, why is it called the Pythagorean theorem? No one ever told you. Well, guess. Why do you think it's called the Pythagorean theorem? Who was the first one to discover it? Pythagoras. Oh. So that's what they do in math and science. A guy comes up with something and they name it after it. Have you heard of the law of gravity? Have you ever heard it called Newton's law of gravity? Why is it called Newton's law of gravity? Because a guy named Newton came up with it. And I guess you would say that would be someone who's looking at the world around him. That could be naturalistic creativity. Pythagoras would be mathematical creativity. So is creativity kind of embedded in all of these? So it's not like you have a separate kind of intelligence called creativity and you just go around creating all kinds of things. Probably if you have, someone who has musical intelligence, what do people with a high level of musical intelligence do? What do they create? Music. You go, what? Yeah. They change something a little bit, and all of a sudden people hear it and go, whoa, that has a nice ring to it. And they come up with a brand new tune. And it's so popular that everybody wants to write words to go along with it. So what's the third kind of intelligence that Sternberg talked about? Practical intelligence. Okay. Now, should there be a separate category for practical intelligence? Or does that fit under all of these? Does someone with spatial intelligence who's a navigator, if he's really good at that, could he have a practical capacity there to where he learns something about navigation? How are you going to get from Spain to the Americas, North and South America, and Central America in a boat without a motor? What would you put on your boat to make it move through the water? That would be a renewable resource that you could use the whole way there. You wouldn't have to have a cargo full of fuel to run a motor. What kind of boats did we call them? Sailboats, where you lift up a sail, the wind catches it. Anyone know the flaw in that thinking? You ever read stories about boats that got out in the middle of the ocean, the wind quit blowing, and they just sat there going nowhere till the wind picked up and came along again? Some guy with practical intelligence would say, you know, maybe we better take some oars along with us just in case. So if the wind quits blowing, we can start rowing and get ourselves a little bit further down the road. A logical, mathematical intelligence with some practical knowledge would be someone who figures out how to use this stuff in a practical way. There's a flagpole somewhere on this campus, and I say, figure out how tall it is. And you go, what are we supposed to do? And so I smile and say, so get a big long tape measure, climb up to the top of the pole, have someone hold it at the ground and tell you what the number is. Is there another way to do it? Yes. Watch the sun shining on the pole and go out far enough from the pole where you have a 45-degree angle between the pole and the ground. And how you do that? You say, well, get one of those little things with 45 degrees. You look through the little glass, you get the top of the pole and the ground lined up at 45 degrees, and there's the spot on the ground where 45 degrees touches. Anyone know what's going to happen if you're 45 degrees away from the top of the pole on the ground? Then you can measure from the bottom of the pole to where your little mark is, and that's how tall the pole is. Oh, that's the practical use of that. So probably practical intelligence would, just like creativity, would flow through all of these. What about the last one in the theories here? He's mentioned after Goldman on page 297. He's mentioned after Gardner's. What about Goldman's emotional intelligence? Perceive and understand your own emotions and the emotions of others, and manage your own behavior and manage relationships. Where would emotional intelligence fit? Look the list over.
Interpersonal.
Interpersonal? Okay. So put emotional intelligence under interpersonal, and that would also be under intrapersonal, wouldn't it? It'd be under both of those. Emotional intelligence fits under intrapersonal too. You're not only self-aware of your body and your mind, you're also self-aware, and maybe add to that, of your emotions. You say, well, that's included in mind. I said, I know, but some people, when they see the word mind, they think of thinking, and emotions is a separate entity. That's why we're going to talk about that today, part of today, and on Friday. So that's the game plan anyway, if we keep going with this stuff. Okay, so I think, anybody else got something to add, or do we stop it? Now, I've got 16 as analytical. Should that be a separate category, or does that fit? Does analytical fit in all of these categories? The more I look at them, the more I think about it, I'm thinking I'm going to erase 16 and just have 15. So do you know anybody that you consider intelligent who doesn't fit someplace on this chart? Where would an apologist fit? Someone who defends the faith. Someone who writes books like Josh McDowell or his son. Would that be linguistic or would that be logical? Or should we add another category called theological? Theology.
Interpersonal has religion under it.
Okay. Religious leaders. Okay, so we'll leave it there. All right, let's keep going so we don't run out of time here. Wasn't that fun? Did you have as much fun doing that as I did? That's cool. Okay. So what are we doing now? So we're talking about intelligence test. So now that we have all these different kinds of intelligences that we talk about, let's talk about taking a test to show how smart you are. Well, we just made up a new one called mechanical intelligence. What kind of test would you give? What would you do to test a person's mechanical intelligence? Any of you ever see those little wooden puzzles that they look like a ball and you take them apart and it's a bunch of pieces? Have you ever tried to put it together? Did you get it together? Well, I didn't even try. So you know what we get? We get minuses under mechanical intelligence. But we don't care because we have pluses someplace else, right? So it doesn't matter. Did any of you just take that little ball and pick those wooden pieces up and snap that thing together and you were done with it? Wow, I'm impressed. I'm impressed. So you see how I could use one of those as a measure of mechanical intelligence. Have any of you ever taken an intelligence test? Raise your hand. Oh, I don't. Okay, you say, no, I haven't. Didn't we do some intelligence test questions when we started this chapter? You say, yeah, but it wasn't a full-blown test. Did you know you can go on the internet? Did you know you can do this? You can Google intelligence test, and you can pick one and take it. And they'll tell you how smart you are. No, now see, that's the assumption that all their questions they're asking are measuring all the different kinds of smarts. Is there any one test that measures all the different kinds of smarts? No, it's not out there. It would be too long. So what they do is they construct tests to measure certain dimensions of intelligence. And does this surprise you? That the IQ test, when it talks about where it came from and how it got started, the IQ test was originally designed to sort out students in school as to who's smart enough to do well without a lot of help and who's going to need some extra help. Or who's smart enough to go on and go to the university and become one of the leaders in our society, and who needs to be sent to trade school to learn a trade because they don't have, and watch what it's called, they don't have school smarts. In other words, a lot of IQ tests have to do with school smarts because it's connected to schooling. And do you know how they calculate your IQ score? Does anyone know how to calculate a person's IQ score? You take the test, and based on how many questions you answered correctly, they calculate your mental age. Then they divide that by your chronological age. Now, how do they know your chronological age? They count from when you were born. How do they know your mental age? They make an assumption that all the 12-year-olds, let's say all the 10-year-olds, should know this information. If they know this much information, then we say they have 10-year-old mental ability. And if you divide that by the age of 10, then that means their IQ score is 100. But what if they can't answer all the 10-year-old questions correctly? And the only ones they got right put them back at a mental age of 8. Then 8 divided by 10 is 0.80. Since people don't like to mess with decimals, multiply it by 100 and you have an 80. So someone with an 80 IQ, all that means is they were 10 years old and all they could answer were the 8-year-old questions. Someone who has an IQ of 120 is 10 years old, but they answer the questions that 12-year-olds normally answer. Do you follow what's going on? Now, what question comes to your mind? The first question that comes to my mind is, who determines what a 10-year-old ought to know, what an 8-year-old ought to know, and what a 12-year-old ought to know? And the people who construct IQ tests, they are the ones who make that determination. They either determine it philosophically, theoretically, or they give a test to 1,000 students and then have 100 10-year-olds, 100 8-year-olds, 100 12-year-olds. Do you follow what's going on? And then they group them together and say, this is the overall average for 10-year-olds, so this is what a 10-year-old ought to know. They either give their tests to a whole bunch of students and then develop some kind of norm based on how everybody answered the questions. When our oldest daughter went to school, they gave her an IQ test. And after they were finished, the lady came out and she said, "Your daughter is very intelligent." Well, I'm a father. I knew that already. But I was curious. I said, what makes you think my daughter's intelligent when you've just met her? And here's what she said. Your daughter can answer questions that nobody else can answer on this test that I'm giving that measures intelligence. And I said, what question did she answer that nobody else could answer? And this was when she was just going to school, so she wasn't learning how to read yet. But she looked at pictures and told them what it was. And she said she recognized a picture of a hedge. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Did any of you have some bushes growing around your house instead of a wire fence that you had to clip all the time? And it was called a hedge. Any of you have that? One. The rest of you didn't have it, right? Just one person had one. Okay, so guess what happens? They all take a test to go to school, to kindergarten, and they've never seen a hedge before, so they can't answer that question. You grew up with one around your house, so you answer the question, so what does the teacher say? You're smart. You're smarter than the rest of them. When in fact, all that really meant was you had had an experience that the rest of them hadn't had. So now, do you understand how this works? Children whose parents read to them, and children whose parents give them little workbooks to work through, and children whose parents take them to Sunday school, and then they take the same test that all the other children who've never been to Sunday school, who don't go to libraries, who don't read, who don't have workbooks, what's going to happen? You understand what's going to happen when they give the test at school? The kids who've had the enriched environment are going to be, what? Smarter, based on the test, than the rest of the population. When in fact they might not be any more intelligent, it's just that's the way the test was constructed. So, do you understand now about this test construction stuff? In fact, it talks about, on page 303, it talks about culturally fair test. And years ago, a guy in St. Louis did this. He took a standardized intelligence test with all these questions about hedges, with all the questions that were built around the context of middle-class American culture, white middle-class American culture. He took this test and rewrote the test, same kind of questions, but the context was the inner city with black culture. Now, what do you think happened when the white suburban kids took his IQ test? If they didn't know the inner city context and inner city jargon, what do you think happened? They scored lower than the inner city kids did. And his whole point was, you have to make sure that the questions and the context presented in your test is culturally fair, that it makes allowance for all cultures. So that means a bunch of farmers. If you build an intelligence test for farmers, the city kids aren't going to score as well as the farmers do. And if you build the test for city kids, the farmers aren't going to score as high as they do. And of course, the higher the score, what? The higher your intelligence when they divide your score by the chronological age. So understand why some people don't care for IQ testing. Because, and I would say the way to say it is, just be aware that this stuff is very subjective. Very subjective. More subjective than most people want to acknowledge. So, page 304 talks about what makes a good test. And there are two things that make a good test. And that's reliability and validity. Any idea what reliability would mean? That if I give you the same test 5 times over 5 weeks, I should get the same results each time. Have any of you ever taken a personality test?
Yeah.
Then you didn't like the results, so you went back and took it again and got a different score? Has that happened to anybody? Or you only took it once and thought, that's it. My personality is all nailed down. No, it isn't. It can depend. You could take a personality. Okay, I could have taken a personality test when I was living on a farm, and then taken another personality test after I came to Kansas City and lived here for a few years, and then taken that same personality test again when I became a teacher. And then for a few years, I was a school administrator, and I actually took a test that I had taken as a teacher and took it again as an administrator, and my scores were different. Because my context was different, my mindset was different, I was operating differently in those different settings. And those differences were reflected in the test scores. Interesting? So say, okay, so that means that this test wasn't very reliable. It wasn't giving me the same results every time I took it. And if you take a test and don't like the results, take the test again. Anybody here in college math? Well, guess what? I gave a test and a whole bunch of people struggled on it. So I said, meet with me on Tuesdays and Thursday during what would be chapel time in the math classroom, and I'll help you walk through this test and see why you missed it. And I had some people on Tuesday going, oh man, I can't believe that. And we were walking through it, and I said, is it fair to say this? That this test score does not represent what you really know. But if you were going to make this test represent what you really know, if you did take the test again, what would you do differently? And they talked about what they would do differently. So you understand, if you don't like how well you did on a certain test, if you get a chance to take it again, you can take it again later. Have any of you ever taken one of these personality tests that says, which do you like more, this or this? And you answered one way one time and then the other way another time? and said, oh, and I got different results, because it's kind of a toss-up. I like both, but it said, no, you have to choose. It's called the forced choice error. That can affect reliability. Okay, so that's reliability. Well, I get the same results every time. So what's validity on page 306? This guy just gave me a test when I was in college and said, well, you're hired. You'll make a good insurance salesman. And I said, I don't think so. He said, yeah, you will. I can tell from the test results. And sure enough, I started selling insurance, and it worked. And I made a good living at it. So what does that mean? That was a valid test. In other words, the test was supposed to predict that you would be a good insurance salesman, and it did. But wait a minute. Did all the other guys I was working with take that same test? Yes. Did it say all of them would be good insurance salesmen? Yes. So out of the 10 guys I'm working with, or I say to my boss, are all 10 of them good salesmen? He goes, well, 9 out of 10 are. So how valid is that test for predicting success as an insurance salesman? It has about a 90% predictability rate. Are you ready for this? That guy would say, and that's good enough for me. I don't mind having the test miss once out of every 10 times, because I gave the test to 20 people and only 10 of them passed it. So those are the 10 that get the job. I'm going, wait a minute. What if some of the 10 that you said you didn't pass the test so you can't sell insurance, what if some of those 10 went someplace else to work where they didn't make you take a test and they became successful insurance people? You follow what I'm talking about? Does this test, is it a valid test to tell you, to predict what it says it'll predict? And if it rejects people, are those valid rejections? And some people don't even think about that side of it. They're so busy thinking about the predicting side of it that they wonder, so these are people who are rejected. And what happened to those people? And some of them actually said, I don't care what that test says. I think I can do this and I'm going to do it anyway. How tall do you have to be to slam dunk a basketball? How many would say you have to be over 6 feet tall? I would tend to say that. I mean, could a guy who's 5'9" slam dunk a basketball?
Yeah, but it just takes a lot of practice.
See, when I first heard that, I said, there's no way. And then a guy named Spud Webb comes along and wins the slam dunking contest, and he's only about 5'9". How does that happen? You have to watch this little short guy soar through the air and slam that ball through the hoop, and you go, that defies explanation. Well, it defies prediction. So how valid is the criteria? And that's what validity means. Does it really, in other words, they gave this daughter a test. She's smarter than most kids. Does that mean she'll make straight A's in school? Well, probably. So her sister comes along, and she lives with a hedge too, so she scores high on the intelligence test, and all of a sudden she doesn't make straight A's like her sister. What happened there? Oh, back to your list. One daughter has wanted to be a teacher all of her life, and she just loves teachers and loves going to school and loves learning things. The other daughter is high on interpersonal skills. And when she got out of high school, she went to college and didn't like it, got a job working at a car dealership, and became one of the best salesmen on their staff. And then eventually they sent her off to school to be a finance manager. Whoa! Very successful, but didn't make all those good grades in school because she had a high degree of interpersonal. Were any of you so interpersonally intelligent that when the teacher said something that offended one of your friends, you took offense and decided to speak up on behalf of your friend and correct the teacher? Were any of you inclined to do that when you were in school? Now that's a high degree of interpersonal intelligence. You tune in to a friend who is hurt by what the teacher said, so you've appointed yourself to confront the teacher and tell them they're wrong. You know what happens when you do that? I know, I'm the parent of one of those daughters. The teacher sends a letter home to me and says, we have a problem. And I sat down with my daughter and I said, you know what the problem is? The problem is that you have a lot of interpersonal intelligence. You're tuned in to all your friends and how they feel and what they think about what the teacher's saying, and you feel it's your job to stand up in their behalf and disagree with the teacher. And when you do that, your grade will be lowered, right? And I know that, and you know that. So just deal with it. Maybe you can keep your mouth shut, and maybe you can't. But you won't make A's in school by arguing with teachers. And why was I a little sympathetic to her arguing with a teacher about something when they said something that hurt one of her friends? Because, surprisingly enough, I have some interpersonal intelligence too, and I understand that point of view. Okay, so that's why on page 307, there's some criticism of intelligence test, and you want to read those criticisms just to be aware of them, so you don't just think that somehow the intelligence test is some kind of magic formula. And on page 308, where it says uses of intelligence test, you can Google that, and you can even find some tests that you can take just for the fun of it. So, page 310, what determines intelligence? Heredity or environment? On page 311. Heredity or environment? What's the answer? Did you come in the world with a certain amount of intelligence as a gift from God? Did we all come into the world with some gifts from God? So some of it's heredity, some of it is just given to us by God. Others, were you raised in a home where you were encouraged to read books? Does that improve your intelligence score? So some of it's environment. I mean, I grew up in what was considered a poor home, a sharecropper's home in Oklahoma, but are you ready for this? We didn't own a home, but we owned a set of encyclopedias because it was important to my parents for all their children to learn to read stuff out of encyclopedias, and we had books to read because they encouraged that. So, if you don't have hereditary intelligence, parentheses, math, but you want to be a math teacher, you probably ought to stay away from teaching high school math and stick with teaching little kids, because it could be that your gift and ability is teaching and math is not the subject that you would be best qualified to teach. So which is more important, heredity or environment? And I say they're both important. And what? We're out of time? How can that be? We're supposed to be starting chapter 9. What am I missing here? I guess you'll just have to read the rest of this on your own. Yep, because we're going to do chapter 9 on Friday. We're just going to stop here and go to chapter 9. That's what we have to do, because we can't